What the Tech is sponsored by Hover.com. Domain names made simple. Go to gfq.hover.com and get 10% off your entire purchase. And by Stitcher Radio. Listen on the go via the Stitcher mobile app. For more information, go to stitcher.com/GFQ. Welcome, everybody, to What the Tech. I am Andrew Zarian, and I'm joined by the original hipster himself, Paul Thurrott.
Wow. I'm almost old enough to... Wait, am I too old to be a hipster?
You're never too old to be a hipster, Paul. Never too old. I'm just going to start stating awful things about you in the beginning of the show, and let's see if it catches on. This week you're a hipster. Next week you'll be, I don't know, a ninja. Who knows? We'll just make it up as we go along. Before we start, I do want to address something. Every week we receive some wacky email for the show.
Yep.
And I got a angry email from a viewer stating that I claimed to be a know-it-all, and he was very upset that I wasn't for piracy. And
wasn't for piracy.
I'm not for piracy, apparently. I don't remember ever stating that I'm
controversial anti-piracy stance of yours.
Yeah. So he said, he goes, I know you're not for piracy, but I guarantee you use Microsoft Office, correct? I bet you've never paid for Microsoft Office. Nobody has paid for Microsoft Office. Everybody pirates Microsoft Office. So to prove him wrong, here is a copy of Microsoft Office.
Yep.
So there, sir.
Actually, I'll add to that and say, not only do people pay for Microsoft Office, but the Office the division at Microsoft that makes Office, which primarily earns money just from Office, makes more revenues and more profits than any other part of Microsoft, including Windows, and has for some time now. So they are, in fact, the biggest part of Microsoft, and they're not that way because people don't pay for Office.
He said what I'm claiming is a sham, and I'm full of it. Those were his exact words, and he was very upset over my stance on anti-piracy.
I'm just ecstatic he didn't come after me.
No, but I guess I'm an easy target.
I think we both are.
Like, I think people assume that you would have legitimate copies of Microsoft products.
Well, actually, I think it's one thing I note I do an article called What I Use Occasionally. I mean, Microsoft gives press members access to TechNet or MSDN, whatever they choose, and it gives them get the ability to get a bunch of copies of Windows and Office and other products so they can evaluate it and so forth. But I've absolutely bought both Windows and Office many times, in fact, and regularly buy the stuff that I use. I mean, that's not the case for everybody, but the vast majority of what I use software-wise, I buy. And I mean, with maybe a couple of exceptions, every single hardware device I have, whatever it is, MP3 players, phones, screens, computers, tablets, whatever. Now, I do have a couple of loaner devices here, including that Microsoft tablet. But, I mean, the vast majority of it I pay for.
So I guess that clears that, Paul. I do own a copy of Office. It's Office 2007.
You need like a debunked sound effect.
I know. And it was made in Puerto Rico, the disc. I didn't know that. Interesting. Office Pro 2007, Win32. This is the last version of Office that I have. So, and listen, I have no problem with that.
Sure.
I guess this guy wanted to prove a point, but...
Pirate.
You pirate. Ridiculous.
It probably doesn't help that your Facebook profile says Andrew Pirate Zarian.
Yeah. Well, last week I did have a swollen eye, and I did state that I might wear an eye patch around town. So maybe that's where he's getting this from. But this kind of leads into the topic today. I do want to discuss social networking, the future of the internet, how social networking has changed the internet, and where we're headed as a society due to the internet and social networking.
I think the quick answer to that question is hell in a handbasket.
Hell in a handbasket, yeah. Because if you compare, do you think people have more freedom on the internet now than they did, let's say, 10 to 15 years ago?
It's kind of a weird question because I think the better comparison in some ways is, do we have more overall freedom than we did, say, 25 years ago when we weren't online. And I'm sorry, there's no going back. You know, for
Yeah.
all of the bad stuff that's associated with the anti-privacy concerns, you know, that maybe you would have around Facebook in particular, or Google stuff. God, could you ever give this up? I mean, could you ever go back to using a Britannica encyclopedia that you bought once because it was like 10 grand and that was all you could afford? It
Yeah,
was
yeah. Well,
always out of date. You know?
what this kind of leads into is anonymity, and is it a thing of the past?
Yeah.
Are we truly anonymous on the internet? How long will this go on? How long will it go on that you could create a made up screen name and that'll be your identity online, and you could make things up as you go along? How long will that happen?
So brittle as topics. I mean, I don't like Google Plus.
You know, for what reason?
For many reasons. I mean, and the simplest thing I can say is that it's just a copy of everything that came before. But you know, the one thing they got right, and of course now they're moving away from it, is they required people to be themselves. You know, one of the things I don't like on Xbox is when I get online that I don't have an option where I can say, "Show me who that person really is," because there's a heightened level of bullshit that can occur when you can pretend to be someone else.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at emails, look at everything else that you see. You know, I could get an email from this guy. I'll have no idea who this guy is that's claiming that I'm a pirate and I haven't bought a copy of Office ever. But if I guarantee you, if his real name came up with that email, he would have never sent that email.
Oh, I have this conversation fairly regularly, whether it's on Twitter or via email or however. I can assure you that 99 times out of 100, if not more, that the type of baloney that people say to me in sort of what they perceive to be a safe online format would never occur in real life. If they were ever standing in front of me, they would never talk to me like that. Not because I am frightening in any way, but because I'm a person. You know, you just don't treat people like that. You know, but you know, if you think about the way people are when they drive, you know, I'm late today because I was out driving. And of course I think about this when you drive around Boston, like New York, I mean, people here are idiots. And I'm struck by how people, when they're in this cocoon, act differently, right? People in cars
Oh yeah, 100%.
think that they're invincible and they always have the right of way and they always go first, you know, and that's an extension of that is how we act when we're online, right? I mean, people take certain liberties that they just don't take in an in-person conversation.
No, it's a very interesting society that we have, because we could still to this day have different identities, and even with Facebook out there, you know, anonymity kind of goes out the window with that, and you kind of it's a different way of thinking at this point, where people do not comprehend the fact that you are whatever you post here continues on in your real life. I think there's always been the separation between the internet and real life. But now I think those two worlds have kind of blended into one, where Twitter and Facebook are everywhere. Everybody has the internet, so everybody could see what you're doing, and everything is traceable. I can't begin to tell you.
If you want it to be. I mean...
But you choose. I mean, again, tell me. You tell me if I'm wrong with this. But a lot of people complain about Facebook's privacy policies and the way that they handle things. My way of thinking is it's not a mandatory thing to have Facebook. And if you don't like their privacy policies and you are that adamant against it, don't use the service.
So,
or
no, it's true, but
don't post things that you don't want out there.
Yes, I mean, there's a nuance to that, because I have a friend, you know, my age guy I grew up with. In fact, we went to school together when we were kids. He literally just joined Facebook this week. I've been hounding him forever. He doesn't understand, or didn't understand, the value of it. And the problem with Facebook is that it's so popular that it's not really a simple matter of saying, hey, if you don't feel comfortable with the privacy stuff, just don't use it. The problem is so many people do use it, and it's so valuable as a social interaction tool that it's hard not to use Facebook, because it's so valuable to use Facebook. But you have to do so knowing that when you use Facebook, the privacy controls in particular are so obtuse and so impossible to navigate that you're probably opening yourself up in ways that you don't even understand. I mean, everyone who's used Facebook has done this click-through thing where a friend of a friend comments on something and you get into their friends list, and then people post pictures that aren't protected, and you can go down like this Facebook wormhole thing far too easily. And but I think the thing that everyone needs to remember about anything like this is that it's early days. And by complaining about it, by debating it and discussing it, maybe through some legal action or potential legal action, these things will correct themselves.
But there's no happy. I mean, there's no middle ground with this. Either it's going to be one way or the other. There are many people out there that are against anonymity on the internet, and they want everybody to be assigned a certain number, or almost like this social security number of the internet, almost like it's this futuristic idea where everybody's assigned a certain number and everybody follows that, and that's where we're headed.
That's like a George Orwell type thing, But there's got to be a happy middle ground. I just would say this. I mean, because of what I do, and you too. I mean, we get feedback from people. It's positive, it's negative, whatever. I mean, people who have interacted with me know. I don't mind debating something, but there's a lot of baloney that occurs, and there's a lot of like faux indignation out there, and there's a lot of just name calling type stuff, and it's just not okay to do that anonymously. If you've got something to say it. Say it as yourself. I mean, have the power of your conviction. You don't have to be right.
Sure.
You just have to be you.
And I'll what I was just looking for, Paul. I was looking at all the emails that I've gotten, and I just Googled, in my I just searched "what the tech" in my inbox for the show, and I'm looking through the emails, and I'm looking at the positive and the negative. And by the way, it's not all negative. I just highlight some of the negative ones because they're silly. There are some negative ones that make a lot of sense. There was one that was one email that said, you guys should discuss security more. And my response to him was, I'm not a security guy, and I don't know if Paul really cares to talk about it.
I'm not a security guy either.
Yeah, so it's not something that really interests me. I know a little bit about it. If it's a big story, we'll bring it up, but I'm not going to do nitty-gritty, high security stuff, because that's not something that interests me, and I don't know if our audience is really interested in that. And I just said this to him.
Right.
It was very aggressive, the first email.
That's okay, but let me guess, because it turned into a conversation.
It turned into a conversation.
As it so often does. I mean, but it's funny because that person who probably didn't intend to be belligerent and probably didn't even think they were being belligerent, that unfortunately that's the way a lot of these online conversations start, because of that unique, it's just like being in a car, like I said. I mean, you go into it with a different frame of, just a different mindset.
But I'm looking here on the names of people that have sent me an email, and the ones that are positive put a first name and a lot of times, surprisingly, a last name.
Yep.
The ones that are negative, no name. So I find it very interesting. It's almost like, what am I going to do with his name now that he criticized me in some way? And it's never like the ones that are like, listen, I really like the show, but it's F you, you're an idiot, or F Paul. It's like one of those.
Right. From newaccount@gmail.com.
Yeah, you could tell. It's like
yeah, exactly.
Teddy Ruxpin 4233 @gmail.com, and this is not a legitimate email.
Sure.
But with anonymity, it's kind of changed. I mean, the last 10 years have almost like anonymity has kind of started to leave with the internet. What were social networks of the internet 10 years ago? I mean, you had AIM. You had, the bulletin boards. You had...
see, I would argue that to a greater degree, the social networks that we have today, the ones that really work, LinkedIn and Facebook primarily, Google+, they're not really replacing AIM, right? They're replacing what used to happen in traditional workplaces or in social clubs or in after-school activities or whatever it is, where people would get together and actually talk, the water cooler. That's what this stuff is. I mean, I don't work in an office, and neither do you. Well, you do sort of, but I mean, people come through your office, so it's a little bit more like a regular workplace. So you interact with people. I get to interact with people when I go on a trip.
There's nothing regular about this workspace.
Right, I didn't want.
I have a dog currently laying on the floor, and I have a coworker. I'm sure not listening to the show and just listening to music, and he's wearing a monkey shirt. He's wearing an astronaut monkey shirt.
My wife
smoking
also
a cigarette
works at home, so my wife is here, and then when people are working on the house, that we have the same guys through sometimes, or I know the delivery people pretty well.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a different dynamic, but honestly, the Facebook is important for the same reason that the internet in general is important, is because it opens you up to a much wider world. I might have a family reunion every 10 years where people from around the country or even the world will come together and get together. But now because of Facebook, I understand my cousins' lives and their kids and what they're doing. And even if I don't post or comment or like anything, I see it and I have this much broader understanding And it's so much better than the alternative.
Well, I think in general we have become more of a globalized society because of services like Facebook and Twitter. I mean, we start and listen, human beings, we're awful people and we're selfish people. I mean that's for the most part, but we have started to realize what happens at the other side of the planet. We actually care about it. I mean, the Coney 2012 stuff, regardless of what you think of the organization and the guy losing his mind and running in the streets of California naked. I mean, this was because it was a globalized effort, right? People from all around the world started retweeting this video. It was one of the greatest mass, I guess, agendas, social network agendas that we have ever seen.
I found out about it from my son, who asked me if I knew what it was.
By the way, did you see the guy
No.
running around the streets naked? He was institutionalized. The creator of one of the co-founders of the organization, he lost his mind.
Sure.
It's phenomenal, the video. And he has become a meme. He has become a thing where he gets naked and he starts slapping his hands up and down onto the sidewalk. And now that's like Tebowing. That's what people do now. They start slapping their hands up and down. So he's a double, I guess.
That's what gorillas in the zoo do as well when they're upset.
That is what they do.
I'm not sure that that's an evolution, to be honest.
But look how we've become a connected society.
Yeah.
But let's compare it to 10 years ago. Let's compare the internet to pre-9/11.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good time to kind of do it because I think 9/11 was a shift in the way that we get information.
Yeah.
Where were we?
Okay, I'm sorry.
But by the way, I have a screenshot of AOL 4.0. When the buildings came down, it was a screenshot and it said, we'll never be the same. I still have that. And think about where we have evolved from there to now with the way that we get our news. The front page of AOL was the news for many people.
Yes. And that day, I mean, I'll never forget that day. I didn't live in New York, but my a friend of mine and a guy I worked with did and was going into work into the city, and we were communicating in different ways. And the funny thing is, I still use one of the tools that I was using at the time. It's got a slightly different name, but I hate it. But I use Windows Live Messenger, which is sort of the IM app that I use. But we had been kind of chatting on that before, and he had, I don't remember how he did this, but it wasn't over the phone, and it wouldn't have been a text message because of what year this was. But somehow I got a message from him. Maybe he just emailed me or from his phone or something, because he was an early BlackBerry user. But he said, it looks like there's a fire in New York.
Yeah.
And
I'll tell you, everybody thought it was some stupid pilot, and it was like a joke. People were laughing and saying how some pilot got lost and he smashed into the building.
Yeah. And I turned on the TV, and I wrote him back, and I said, you need to get off the bus, because he was coming in from Hoboken, turn around and go home now. This is not a fire. This is serious.
Yeah.
And it was like this weird kind of real-time thing that, by the way, if that happened today, we all have smartphones, and this is all very common. But in 2001, I mean, this was 2 years before I sent my first text message. I mean,
nobody. I mean, in the States, nobody was texting. But if you look at Europe was doing text messaging for a while because they had those Nokias, the brick Nokias, and a lot of there's a very large Greek population where I live, and a lot of my friends go to Greece and they come back for the summer. They go and they all came back with these Nokias, and everybody was texting.
Right.
Everybody was texting, and they go, yeah, this is how people, nobody calls each other in Europe.
Well, one of the big deals of 9/11 from sort of a technology standpoint was that all the cell phone stuff went down.
Except for one. Nextel.
Well, okay, I was going to say, but the BlackBerries kept working. In other words, because the way the BlackBerry network worked, and still works actually, it was redundant, right? They had all these different, they had their own thing. And so that was like a lot of the people who were able to communicate were doing so on they weren't using phones they were phones, of course, but I mean, they weren't like regular cell phones like we had of the day. They had these text capabilities or ran over a different kind of a network. So they were kind of, they were internet-like, actually, I think is maybe the way to say it. It's interesting. Yeah.
But let's go back. Let's go back to 10 years, 11 years ago, pre 9/11. How the internet has changed from then to now. If you look at it, it's gotten a lot prettier, and there's something called Facebook.
It's a bigger pipe, that's for sure.
It's a much bigger pipe, but overall, the culture of the internet, how has that changed? I think
Actually, all right, well, the biggest thing, of course, is that it's normal people, right? In the early days, it was very technical people and people who, had it at work and were using it for those purposes. I always use this example of my friend Chris, who very late to the game when it comes to things like using a video game console, having a computer just for personal use. Still doesn't own a laptop, by the way, which is kind of interesting. But very late to the game with smartphones and so forth. But it's interesting as technology evolves, it goes from being a highly technical tool to being something that a normal guy could use. And I use Chris as an example because this guy happens to be very athletic. He plays every sport on earth. He's concerned about that kind of stuff. And when this stuff becomes important to him, you mean I can get real-time ESPN on this thing? I can. That's when he goes for it.
Yeah.
That stuff wasn't there 10 years ago. I would have been on the leading edge of that stuff because I just like technology. That's the way I am. This guy 10 years ago, he had that StarTAC phone or whatever, with the extending antenna. Actually, that you showed off last week, a phone like that. I mean,
Sure.
and probably had one until last year or whatever. I mean, very old fashioned. We used to always make fun of his phone. I think that's the big, right? I mean, that's the difference, right? When it's not like a gray background on a website. It's an interactive experience that's as neat as anything you'll see on cable.
But yeah, I guess that's it. But what are people doing on the internet now that they weren't, 11 years ago? I think many of the things have stayed the same. You're talking to people, which you did that with AOL. I mean, some may say AOL was a social network. You had the chat rooms, you had the buddy list, you had member profiles. I mean, if you look at it, it's a very early day.
A gated community.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's exactly what Facebook is in a way, and that's where people went for their information, for their news. You could search things. So Facebook is kind of, if you look at it, it's a different way, but it's very similar in that aspect that you're in this gated community, like Paul just said. But
yeah,
you were doing that. You were shopping.
It's the biggest gated community on earth.
I know, with 700 plus million members. I mean, that's the crazy thing. What was AOL's peak? AOL's peak was like 32 million.
Yeah, but it was a different age. I mean, what percentage of internet users went AOL? I mean, it was like 90% probably at one time. I mean, so Facebook is huge, but in the context of the day, it's still not what AOL was, say 10 or whatever years ago.
Yeah.
This stuff, there's so many parallels to this. And again, if, some of these stories are just old, so I probably told them before, but I mean, when we lived in Phoenix 15 years ago or so, I came across a guy at a flea market who had boxes of old video games from the early 1980s that were literally never opened in boxes. They survived a video game crash of 1983. They'd never been sold. He bought them for pennies each. And I knew the value of them because I was kind of a collector, if you will, of these first generation video games. And I would buy a bunch of them from him, and you could sell them locally. But then I would get on AOL and I could sell them over, I think it was like Usenet access through AOL. So now all of a sudden you have this big audience, that you can sell them to. People would spend $25, $50 a shot to get like a boxed, never opened copy of a game that, by the way, in some cases had never even been sold publicly out in retail.
Yeah.
And then sensing the fact that I was buying a bucket load of these things, he started finally raising the prices. But, Facebook does that for communications. There's only so much you can do locally. You have this little group of people that maybe you go to your kids' soccer games, a couple of the mothers and the fathers, you chat for a while, and sometimes you become better friends and sometimes you don't, whatever. But, with Facebook, the people that you used to know in many cases, or the people that you interact with, sometimes through work-related things or whatever, but maybe live in other parts of the country, are suddenly very accessible. So it's the same thing. It just opens, it opens up the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, how do you see it evolving, Paul? How do you see this going, 10 years from now? Let's go 10 years into the future. Where will we be as far as the internet? Because
Yeah.
You know what? And I said this a couple of weeks ago. Either we're going to be, looking back and saying, wow, I can't believe this was regulated. I can't believe you couldn't watch every show on the internet. I can't believe we had bandwidth caps and we had throttling. Or we're going to say, oh, my God, can you believe it? We didn't have throttling like this. And we were able to watch things.
Yeah, it's hard to even come up with like a concrete thought to this one. This is going to sound a little hokey, but Microsoft has a goofy, stupid, just really silly thing in the Xbox right now where you can go into these virtual rooms with little animated characters that look nothing like you, and you can all stand around in a room and you can do something together. Sometimes it's just chatting. Sometimes it's watching a TV show, by the way, and you do it together. You watch a game. That's one of the ESPN experiences, and the Xbox is like that. It's exactly what you would expect because of when we are in the cycle. But when you talk about 10 years from now, it's not hard to imagine a situation where instead of your buddies coming over to watch the football game on Sunday, you sit down in your living room and the visual representation of those people are in the room with you. One of them's in France, one of them's in San Francisco, one of them's up in Canada. Mm-hmm. You're all there together watching the game, and you look like you're there, and you're interacting. I mean, I think this is the natural progression of that stuff. And I'm not giving Microsoft credit for inventing this idea. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying there's kind of a silly early version of it in the Xbox today. But there's no doubt that the future of these social interactions is going to be that. How awesome is it right now to go to Google Maps and do a street level view of Paris or Rome or Sydney, Australia, or whatever? And it's like you're there. But take that to the next logical dimension. I mean, what if this thing was projected around the walls of your room in the living room, and you're sitting in the couch navigating around a city in what seems like real time, and it's realistic, it's photorealistic. It's like you're there. It's like an immersive we're getting into like holodeck territory there all of a sudden.
No, you're absolutely right.
The world is literally getting, not literally, the world is getting smaller.
Yeah, and I guess it'll continue to get smaller as we become more and more connected. I mean, everybody that I know to some extent is on the internet. Last week we discussed a post-PC world and what it'll be, but what will it be in this post, Internet 2.0 world? Yep. That's going to be very interesting when everybody's connected with everything that they do, and to an extent, I mean, how many more alerts can we get for stuff? I mean, I guess that's the connection that we have. Everything is connected. You got your cell phone, and speeds will increase over time. But I'm trying to think of how the fundamental use of the internet will evolve over the next 10 years. I think social networking has totally changed it. I mean, and that's only a recent thing. You're talking about something that's been going on, at the Facebook and the MySpace level for the last 6 years, 7 years. So it's a new kind of way of doing the internet.
Arguably, that's the driving force, though, right? I mean, when it comes down to it, we're social animals. I mean, we like to interact. Being able to do so over great distances is an amazing feat. There are very simple examples of communication. I mean, today we have people using Skype to do video calls back to Portugal or South America or Australia, whatever. I mean, it's amazing, right? Distance doesn't matter for that kind of thing. I mean, for me, the big one happened a long time ago. It was an amazing epiphany. But in a moving vehicle on the Autobahn in Germany, we called my son back at home with his grandparents on a rented cell phone, right? Because 2003, you wouldn't have had one that could work, and talked to this kid. Mark happens to be deaf, which is kind of adds to the technological challenge of what we just did. And he has cochlear implants, which help him hear. But we're having a normal conversation with our child in a moving vehicle on the Autobahn in Germany. And I'm thinking to myself, it's almost like tear-inducing just thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's amazing how it's evolved. I mean, and the technology has changed rapidly. I mean, it's a very rapid change that's happening. And, in hindsight, you look back and you say, well, 10 years ago, what were we doing? And, we weren't texting. We didn't have internet on our phones, majority of us. I mean, I'm sure somebody did, but
it's
By the way,
I mentioned earlier that I know the first text I ever sent. I was at a Microsoft conference in 2003, and my phone, which was a Motorola Q, made it doesn't matter what kind of phone it was, but my phone at the time made a sound I had never heard before. And I looked at it, I was confused, right? And I'm like, what the hell, what is this thing? And this guy I knew had written me an incredibly long text.
Jeez.
He was really, and he had like you can, like on a number pad, you can do that kind of texting.
There's some pros at that.
Oh yeah, he was amazing. So he had written like a paragraph of text that way. And what it ultimately all came down to was, it was like, Paul, this is going on, this is going on, this is going on. We should meet at this time and place. Is that okay with you? And I wrote back, actually, I might have just had a regular phone because I think I used the same kind of keypad. But my response was a single letter. It said K. Because that was like all I could handle. I just couldn't imagine typing on this thing. So this must have been
Well, somebody just messaged me. He goes, to get off the internet a little, look at computing. Who would have thought, 15 years ago that Apple would be, have $100 billion in the bank and become, one of the largest, probably the largest company in the world currently.
Yeah, but if you want to boil it down as to why, right? And I don't mean like innovation and ideas. I mean, but literally kind of boil it down to the essence of what Apple did, which is computing 10 years ago, by and large, even though we had some portable computers, of course, you would go to a place, sit down in front of a thing and compute. And then when you were done, you would get up and you would leave and you would walk away. It was kind of like, we used to go to a library to get a book, and then we would bring it home, and we'd go to a store and buy a thing. Computing was a thing that occurred at a certain place. It had a place in our life, And what Apple did ultimately, I think their big success, was ushering in this era of not just mobile computing, but like pervasive mobile computing. The notion that you could be out, could be on a train and look at your phone and communicate with people. You could be sitting somewhere,
Also, Paul, Apple benefited greatly from the internet because of its Usenets and its groups. They really survived because of that and the connection that they were able to have with other Mac users.
Yeah. So right, Guy Kawasaki, one of the original Apple evangelists, started I think it was a Usenet group or a mailing list or whatever in the mid 1990s called the Evangelist, and it was specifically to publish positive information about a company that at that time was spiraling toward bankruptcy, and he wanted to remind people of how special the company was and not to give up on it. And yes, I mean, you can. By the way, there are far more meaningful uses of internet technology than that. You can think about what happened in Egypt and the way those people communicated when they overthrew their government. In Libya, same thing. I mean, these are all just examples of, again, people who might otherwise be unable to communicate, being able to seamlessly communicate and make something happen. And that, by the way, that is literally the foundation of democracy right there. I mean, for all of its warts and issues, I mean, ultimately, being able to communicate and understand what's going on.
Well, also seeing what's happening at the other end of the world. There are many countries, unfortunately, that because of government and certain religions that have overtaken kind of the country, they have never seen, what anything other than what they see currently. That is all that they've seen. That is all that they know, and they know that everything else is bad.
But
but now because of the internet,
you can't unsee something. I mean, I think that's the amazing bit of it. So for those people who are oppressed in rural China or wherever they may live, at some point, having been exposed to something, it's over. They can keep oppressing those people, of course, and maybe even in that person's lifetime, things won't get better. But you've unleashed the dragon. There's no way to put it back once you've seen it, once you understand.
No, I don't think so at all. And I do want to continue this. But before we do, Paul, we have to thank our great sponsor, Hover.com, domain names made simple. I was supposed to have a meeting with them today, and I was late, and they're mad at me now. But it's all right because Hover is the best company out there, and I'll tell you why they're the best for domains. It's a very clean layout, it's very slick, and they don't upsell you. They're not like those other guys that constantly try to bombard you with scare tactics, some may say fear-mongering, to buy certain things for your domain. So one thing would be private registration. Some of those other guys scare you into getting private registration and forking up maybe $6 to $11. With Hover, it's included. It's there. There's no extra fee for that. Certified domain, everything is included with Hover. They don't try to upsell you with these little add-ons, and they do domain names only. They're not a host. They're only domain names, and they do it really well. If you go to gfq.hover.com, you can get 10% off your entire purchase. One thing I do want to talk about is their great customer service that they offer, and the reason why they're so great is because there's no hold times. They just pick up if you're calling between business hours. They just pick up the phone and they'll help you out whatever you need. They also have a concierge service if you're looking to transfer your domain name from those other guys. It's $10 to transfer the name for the year, and they, of course, everything that you had previously with that other company is still honored. So if you have a year left, they still honor it because it's through ICANN and you know the rest. Go to gfq.hover.com, get 10% off. Also, you could use promo code GFQ upon checkout and get the 10% off. And tell your friends also. If you're not getting a domain name, tell your friends. Paul needs me to buy him sneakers. He called me the other day. He said, I need sneakers and sell some more domain names with Hover so you could buy me sneakers. Is that right, Paul? Paul needs sneakers.
I'm a little confused why you know that.
Do you really need sneakers?
I do actually. It's fun. That's bizarre.
That's really weird.
I just exchanged an email with someone. We play basketball on Wednesday night, and I had a serious injury because of a sneaker issue a couple of years ago, and was just literally telling this guy that I'm not playing again until I get new sneakers.
That's hysterical.
That's really strange.
That's really weird. Actually, I just bought sneakers, so that's why I went to sneakers. But hover.com. Now I do want to go to
Talk about invasion of privacy.
I know.
Now I'm really concerned. I'm like, where did I do this on Facebook?
You know what's funny? Right before you went on the air, I turned to one of the guys, John, from the comic show here. He's in the studio, and I go, I have a feeling Paul got into a car accident. Something happened with his car.
Right.
And when you send me the message, he goes, "You're a psychic, man. You're a psychic."
Fortunately, it was my wife.
Fortunately for you, yeah. Yeah, I was wrong in that aspect, but to go back to the topic, now, we have become a wired society. We have become more of a society that's connected. Everybody knows that. Everybody has a cell phone that's connected to something on the internet. To go back to anonymity, in 10 years, where do you think we will be when it comes to privacy for our personal lives? Will we smarten up, or are we just going to start posting everything and anything on the internet?
This will be legislated. It is going to happen. I mean,
in what way, Paul?
Well, because laws are slow to catch up with fast-moving things like technology. But we're going to look back and laugh at a lot of the things we allow Google and Facebook and so on to do today, in the same way that we look back and laugh, and not really laugh, but just wonder at, we didn't have seatbelts in cars. We let people smoke in a crowded airplane. That kind of stuff. I mean, anyone who's driven, in the 1970s, kids would play around in the back of a station wagon while it was riding 75 miles an hour down the highway. It's crazy.
Yeah.
To even consider those things. We will look back on this kind of stuff with the same, kind of slack-jawed amazement. It just doesn't make sense. And so, we're rushing forward. I mean, we're running as fast as we can to have all these capabilities. We're going to iron that stuff out. I'm positive. I mean, and every time an issue like this is raised, whether it's someone who's talking about Google or Facebook or any one of these companies, that's how it begins. People ask questions. And
see, with Google, I fear it a little bit more because you kind of cannot control certain things that you do on Google. If you're looking for something, you're looking for something. If you're sending an email, you're sending an email.
But you don't. You shouldn't have to control it. In other words, if you really care about this stuff today, they have controls that you can use to browse privately, to go through different addresses, to obscure your, all that stuff. That's going to be the default. That will be the default.
But with Facebook, can't we control what we do and say on Facebook? I mean, isn't that our responsibility to some extent? I know the company has some sort of responsibility, but I think the people that use the service, like Facebook and these social networks, should have some sort of responsibility to pull back on certain things.
Well, of course, but the problem is today, anyone who's looked at the privacy controls in Facebook can tell you it's hard to understand.
Sure.
You don't understand the ripple effect that checking certain things has, They have some basic ways to figure that stuff out. Here's how your page will look like to someone else or whatever. But this stuff is just going to get easier. I just think that there's an open fire hose right now for technology, and we're all very excited about it and everything. Eventually, we're going to step back and say, okay, hold on a second, because what it's going to take, unfortunately, are bad things to happen. There will be the stalking type events and so forth. And they'll put a stop to that. I mean, it's just going to happen. I'm not worried about it. I mean, for myself, I happen to be very transparent about what I do because of what I do, partially, and because part of me just doesn't care. I mean, I do sort of subscribe to that notion of, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to hide. I mean, I don't really, people aren't going to show up at my house with a camera and find out that I'm slaughtering goats in the backyard or anything. I don't really have any weird, stuff to have to worry about.
But I'll give you an example though. I've spoken to people about this, and I have a relative that posts 20 pictures a day on Facebook, and she will say anything and everything on Facebook. Sure. And it's almost like when you read it, you feel embarrassed that you know this person. And
you're going to be really embarrassed when you go to get a job, and that's the reason they use for not hiring.
And I explained this to her, and she's younger. She's 18, 19.
Sure.
And I sat her, we had a family thing, and I'm like, everything that you put on Facebook, it's not. She's actually, what drove me to that is somebody read something she said on Facebook and didn't like it. And her response was, well, Why are you reading my Facebook?
Because you can.
Because you
God,
can.
you kidding me?
And she didn't understand that. She's like, well, it's my Facebook. I could do and say whatever I want. And she's a kid. And I'm like, oh, you're a stupid child. But she didn't understand the aspect. Like, okay, you're doing this now on Facebook. You know, let's say you're going to put, went to a party, got really drunk last night. You're going to apply for a job in a year. Now with Timeline, everything is there. So I could, as a boss, go back and be like, you know what? I really want to know what this person was like 3 years ago. I go back and I see that you're a total degenerate. I will never hire you.
Well, but again, this is the type of thing that maturity will solve, and not just for her, but I mean for the technology. You know, in the old days, not knowing how to fix a car meant you couldn't really drive a car, and people would still drive a car, and they would break down, and then someone would say, "Hey, this is your responsibility. You need to know how to fix this thing." I mean, we don't really think like that anymore for that kind of thing, and I think it's going to go that way with this privacy stuff in particular, because right now it's really designed to make it hard for you to control your privacy in the way that you want to.
I mean, can you imagine, Paul, that if people had camera phones and YouTube when you were younger?
Well, but
I would have never gotten hired anywhere.
Sure.
I would be doing internet radio for a living if that existed. Oh, wait, I am, yeah.
Right. Wow. So, no, I mean, obviously, as a young guy, I would have done the same stupid stuff that kids are doing today, of course. I mean, I would have given anything to have this stuff. I mean, all of it. You know, I have often said, just from more of a practical standpoint, I mean, how awesome would it be to go to school today and have a tablet or a laptop or both, or, you know, all these awesome applications and stuff. I mean, I used to write notes with my hand and put it in paper and, you know, never use it again.
I was writing to somebody the other day. I had to write something and my hand was tired after like 5 minutes of writing.
Oh, I hurt my hand just signing a check.
Yeah. It's so weird now. Paul, did you get the iPad?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I like it a lot. I mean, you know, it's honestly going from an iPad 2 to this one is not a great decision for the most part. But the big difference for me is there's two things. I mean, I actually do read on the iPad, not exclusively, but I do. And honestly, the text is like a million times crisper. I mean, it's very dramatic.
But
so
if
much
you have
so
an
that I
iPad
bumped
2,
the font size down.
If somebody has an iPad 2, would you say, wow, this is a big dramatic?
Don't upgrade for that. But the other big deal with this is the wireless stuff. And I didn't have a cellular based iPad before. And I don't have tethering on AT&T yet, but I will. They have international plans. It's pay as you go. I can't wait to do that. I'm sorry, I mean hotspot support. I can't wait to be able to do that kind of stuff. And I think that's a big deal, you know. And if you have an iPad original model, or you've never bought a tablet, I mean, it's amazing. You know, they're expensive, but they're very high quality devices. I mean, it is maybe one of those cases where you get what you pay for it. The reason I keep beating the drum on the cost of these things is that I think people kind of lose their minds when it comes to Apple products, and they don't really think about what they're doing money-wise. I don't think most people can afford it. You know,
yeah,
$700-800 for an iPad is a lot of money. And by the way, you know, they're replacing it next year. Not that this becomes immediately useless when they do replace it next year, but it's a vicious cycle, and I think not enough people think about it pragmatically in that way. But, you know, again, it's beautiful. It's just a great device.
I don't think anybody sees it in that sense. I think the people that are going and buying these every year have this disposable income, or they think they have the disposable income to go and get the latest and greatest thing. I don't know for myself if a Retina display is enough to make me purchase another one of these, considering I bought one exactly a year ago.
Yeah. Well, you have more common sense than some people. So what do you use it for? I mean, that's the big difference right there.
I play games. I play, little tower defense games or whatever, Angry Birds or whatever it is. I read the news, and I send out tweets every now and then, and that's all I do on there.
Well, you need to look at it in the store. I mean, the text display, again, is beautiful. So Amazon updated their Kindle app the day the device shipped, which is great. And then you look at those things side by side, and seriously, there's no comparison. It's amazing. I don't play games. I couldn't care less about games. I do watch videos, but honestly, you know, you put an HD video, it's like 1.9 gigabytes per hour. That's going to eat up the space really quick. It's kind of this combination of like huge file sizes and really small amounts.
I'll be honest with you, Paul. I ran out of space on my iPad, and I have no media on there. I only have apps.
Yeah, see, I don't do that.
And the apps have gotten so big where, a game is like a gig and a half.
Oh yeah, no, of course they're huge, but I don't do a lot of that stuff personally. I know people do, but I for me that has nothing to do with it. I couldn't care less about apps.
I see. I'm big on the apps. I'm big. I play them. I test different apps. I have 1,000 apps that do the same thing, and I have a bunch of different games.
So, I am surprised they didn't go 32, 64, 128 on the storage, and then left the 16 to be the iPad 2. That they kept in market. I'm really kind of surprised by that. I wouldn't be surprised if they added a 128 option this year, because I think those bigger file sizes is going to be very common.
Yeah,
because of the apps, because of the Retina display requirements.
What I find interesting is how people are saying, like, this is the post-PC revolution. This is the device that's going to bring you into the post-PC world. But it's a 16-gig device. 16, 32, 64. What are you going to store on this thing for 64 gigs?
But, this is part of the evolution. I mean, on the PC side or the Mac side, we had these hard drives. And the small hard drives you would put in a laptop, they're getting bigger and bigger from a capacity standpoint. And the last one that I bought, if I'm not mistaken, was a hybrid drive. And it probably had, I think it had like 750 gigs of storage, or 640 maybe. It was humongous. And then you go to SSD, 64 gigs, maybe 128. They do have 256s. I've never bought one because they're so expensive. You really reassess things when you have that little amount of storage. And I think the iPad and those devices combined with cloud connectivity to content is kind of the answer, where you used to have all this stuff with you because you were always going to be offline.
Yeah, we become a society of hoarders for files, right? I mean, I'm responsible.
Oh, yeah.
I do that all the time.
Discs and, But now the assumption is you're going to be online.
I'm going to look on my network files because I'm going to look at what media I have here. A lot of it is music that, you really can't keep on the cloud. You got to have something locally.
You're looking on the iPad?
No, I'm just looking on my computer for my media devices. For music, I can understand music, but I have songs that I will never listen to again, ever in my life.
Right, but so when you have a device that is either dedicated to music, like an iPod that has a lot of storage space, or you have a laptop, like I said, that has like 500, 640, 750 gigabytes of RAM of storage, you put your whole music collection on there. You put a lot of your movies on there. You put all kinds of apps on there, whatever. You don't really think about it. But when you start talking about like 32 gigs of storage or 64 or maybe even 128 on a PC, suddenly you're a lot more selective than you used to be. And I have to say, one of the things that Apple's done a really good job at, and this has almost nothing to do with the iPad in particular, is, you can put all your music up in their cloud service, and then on whatever device you have, whether it's a PC or whatever, you can say, I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And you just kind of download the stuff you want locally, and that's what you can listen to when you're on a trip or whatever. So
I think the storage thing, they're going to have to bump up if they're going to become this post-PC device.
Yeah, I mean, right. If they had kept the iPad at the same resolution as the previous version, we wouldn't be having this discussion, though, because at 1024 by 768, this is not a concern. SD video is not very big. It's well under a gigabyte for an hour of content. Actually, it's potentially under a gigabyte for 2 hours of content. And then you can put more of your music on there. You can have more apps. The apps are lower res, so every app is going to take up much less space. It becomes an issue. It's a temporary issue, I'd say, because of the sheer size of the display. And I don't think anyone foresees that changing anytime soon. It's not like they're going to quadruple the resolution for next year. I mean, I think we're going to be at this point for a long time, which is fine. It's beautiful.
So would you say, what's happening for me is that the OS has not really changed. The overall look of iOS has been the same. Do you feel that with Windows 8, and this is how I feel, with Windows 8 coming out to the tablet and it's being this radical design and so different and so revolutionary, do you feel that they're going to have to change something in the overall design, or are they going to stick to what they know?
They're behind on that stuff. I mean,
they have fallen behind, but it's still the phone to buy. I mean, I recommend this phone to everybody, but they have kind of fallen behind as far as the design goes.
But that's okay. But on the flip side, it's also very familiar. Lots and lots of people get it. It's, to them, what is the easiest interface. We could sit here and debate, whether this thing is efficient or whether the iPad makes sense for multitasking and yada, yada, yada. But the truth is, tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, whatever, they get it and they use it and they like it and they don't really think about that stuff and that doesn't matter to them. So moving from an iPod to an iPhone now to an iPad, to them is very natural. So
Have you had that heating issue?
no,
People
I try. See, I don't do enough of the hardcore stuff. I played some HD video today to see if that would trigger it, and it did not. I've been told that, there are benchmarks you can run. There's some apps you can run. I don't know. Did you see the Consumer Reports thing, which I think was probably the most relevant?
I didn't see the consumer. I'm
So
reading.
go to consumerreports.org.
I'm looking at the CNET article.
No, don't forget CNET. CNET is a third level source. Go right to consumerreports.org.
Okay.
And on their front page, they will have somewhere, says under consumer news, it says our tests find new iPad hits 116 degrees while running games. Now that's amazingly hot. One of the things that I know from reading laptop reviews is that, well, two things. One is 95 degrees is the borderline. If you have a device sitting on your lap, 95 degrees is when it gets too hot to be comfortable.
Yeah.
Even Apple says that the operating environment for the iPad 2 is 95. It goes up to 95 degrees for that device. And so you could this thing actually cranks up to 116 degrees playing that game Infinity Blade 2, which, by the way, is the game that came out last year, right? Not the one,
Not the new one.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's really hot.
But see that heat map image they have for both of the different iPads. You can see the difference. The iPad 2 is mostly very cool, and the iPad 3 or whatever looks like it's about to explode.
Yeah, look at this.
It's really,
oh my God, that thing is like going like thermal, nuclear.
Again, for my own use, I'm not going to see this. Although maybe I don't know, maybe heavy LTE usage could do it. We know LTE.
So it's the video. It's the video device, the video card that's kind of causing this to happen.
Is that what it is?
I'm assuming, right? I mean, that's really the only big.
I think
change.
It's a combination of components, right? So they have like the video and processor on the same chip. They're driving an incredibly high, dense display, obviously, and then they do have an antenna. I mean, I don't know if although actually in Consumer Reports test, the 4G connection was not on, so it didn't contribute.
Yeah, this is interesting. I wonder why. If it's not 4G, then it has to be the video and well, Infinite Blade 2. Well, you know what though? I'll tell you, Paul. Even with the iPad 2, it does heat up a little bit when you're playing a game like that.
See, I don't play games, so I just don't see this. I don't know what to say.
I mean, it heats up a little bit, but it's not anything that you would say, "Wow, this is really hot." It's not like the cell phone. When you're on, like my phone heats up a lot. This phone.
Yeah. See, I've certainly witnessed the cell phone heat issue from time to time. The phone that I'm using now, which is like a single core Samsung Focus, Windows Phone, it doesn't really get hot. But again, I don't really tax it. It doesn't have an LTE antenna, of course, so that's no issue there. I mean, the screen is relatively low res. I mean, 800 by 480 is no longer a big deal. I mean, that's kind of low res today.
I mean, but the screen resolution on this iPad is just mind-blowing. Now, this led to a different conversation we were having on Friday on Tech News Weekly. We were discussing if this Retina display will carry over to their laptops in the next design. Will the MacBook have a Retina display? So
here's the interesting thing. This never even occurred to me to think of until somebody asked me this via email. They said, so with the iPad having essentially 4 times the number of pixels as the other iPad, does that mean that the little icons are all like really teeny, right? That you've got this giant home screen with all little icons on it,
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things that never even occurred to me to think of. But no, the truth is that this home screen has the same grid of icons that the other one does. So they've scaled the display. It's a little sharper. It's not dramatically sharper, but clearly those icons have to be 4 times as big. That's what they've done. They've scaled the icons.
I believe that the latest version of OS 10 and the next release do have high resolution icons.
Right, which isn't the same thing as scaling, right? And that's the issue. So in other words, Mac OS 10, like Windows, is basically a bitmap display. So they have to make all the elements bigger and render them in different ways. Mac OS 10 has a certain way of rendering text, which I happen to think is great. Some other people don't, but whatever. They have got a nice text display. They've always had bigger bitmap icons than Windows does. So probably in Mac OS 10, the Mountain Lion version coming out, those icons may scale up to 512 by 512 or 1024 by, I don't know how big they are. They're probably humongous. Apple, despite the fact that the technology is not really any more sophisticated than what Microsoft uses, has always done a better job, even though it's not truly resolution independent, of scaling to higher res displays.
Yeah.
If they can do this kind of thing on Mac OS 10, that is a significant advance. And it's something that Microsoft is not going to be able to duplicate effectively in Windows 8. It's a problem. It's a problem on the desktop part. You know, the Metro stuff, that new stuff that's in Windows 8, actually does decent resolution scaling. It's not independent. You know, it's not
for higher resolution displays. It's able to kind of scale.
Yes. In other words, you can write an app to a certain resolution, 1366 by 768. But if you put it on a 1920 by 1080 display, like I do here at home, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. So the new stuff will look great, but the desktop is never going to look good. It just doesn't. And that's something that Apple has always done well, even though the technology is sort of the same thing.
Do you think this would be a game changer if, you know, we're trying to think how, and there was an article in CNET saying, has Apple lost its design edge? And I, you know,
Yeah.
I can't agree with that at all. There's
Well,
nothing.
that was, aside from being like link bait.
Yeah.
Right.
I was looking at that this morning and I was thinking, I'm like, really? I'm like,
That's like saying, you know, has Apple lost its soul because it now is like the biggest company on earth, you know?
Yeah.
Or it's like, I used to like REM until they became really popular. Now they suck.
Yeah.
You know? No, I honestly, so I think we can all expect the Retina display type technology to appear in the Mac, right? So we'll get these Mac.
I don't think we're gonna get it with the next version, and I appeared on the Geek Gamer Weekly podcast, which you have once before actually, over the weekend, and that was a topic of discussion: is what's gonna happen in the next version, and I said there's no way they're gonna put the Retina in the next version. What they're gonna do is they're gonna take the Mac line and just go all air.
Yes. Okay. I was going to say that would be the next logical
That would
step.
be the next logical step, and that would kind of compete overall. The entire company is competing in this ultrabook market. The Air becomes the MacBook, and then the MacBook Pro, you know, becomes the MacBook Pro, and they're all Airs.
So I would take it to sort of an interim step where I would say there's something that some other laptop developers have done that I think is pretty valuable, which is they essentially put the same size. They put a 15-inch screen in a 14-inch body, if you will, right? Because typically a 15-inch screen or any size laptop, there'll be some kind of a bevel around the screen. And what they do is they reduce the size of the bevel. It allows them to put a bigger screen in a smaller device. And that seems like the type of thing that Apple would do, right? So that there will be a 15-inch version of the Air, a 17-inch version potentially, where the bezel will be very small, allowing them to have the biggest possible screen in the smallest possible space. I mean, obviously the physical thing has to be a certain size.
So you're saying that it would still, the form factor would be the same, just a larger screen because they would get rid of the bezel, or a smaller bezel.
Potentially. So imagine I guess the simplest example would be to say, imagine a 13-inch MacBook Air that had a 14-inch screen in it. In other words, you don't change the body at all. You just make the screen bigger. You know, that's one step. But I think, you know, the pixel density thing, assuming Apple can solve the thermal and battery life issues that would accompany such a change, I would say they're going to do it. I mean, they're going to do it eventually. I would. And it wouldn't surprise me to see it happen before Monday.
So now this goes into a different discussion now. So let's say they do the higher resolution display on this. What does that mean? What does that mean for every other computer manufacturer trying to compete in this market? They're going to have to go into that they're going to have to take that leap, and that's going to be quite difficult to do.
Last week I wrote an article called Compete Report, and I talked about the high density stuff. Microsoft's been talking about this for a decade. Almost no one has done anything about it. You know, high density displays, well, by the way, including Microsoft. So Microsoft's desktop interface does not scale well. It just doesn't. They have that interface. We can go in and say, okay, 120%, 150%. It looks like crap. It's awful.
Oh, if you go over 100%, it looks awful.
Right. The only thing that looks good when you do that, by the way, the one thing Microsoft has done very well is text scaling. So you can see this in Internet Explorer 10 Metro on Windows 8.
Yeah.
Put that thing full screen on a 1920 by 1080 display. Bump the font size up until the web page you're viewing literally fills the width of the screen. It will look ridiculous because it's big, but that the text is so crisp and so clean with no little pixel edges. It's beautiful. They do a beautiful job of that. But they screw everything else up. I mean, every little UI element, all the buttons and menus all look terrible. It's terrible. That's not going to be solved in Windows 8. It just isn't.
No.
I mean, again, on the Metro side, yes. But this is, like a serious issue. And by the way, I think you could make an argument that, if Apple can do a good job on that on the Mac, even though the sort of traditional computers become more and more of a niche market over time, compared to tablets perhaps, that's a significant advantage for people who want to be productive. I always sort of imagined before we saw this kind of touch future that the future of these OSs, because you sort of assumed computers would just continue somewhat unchanged, right, was resolution independence. And that when you look at things like ClearType and you apply that to buttons and menus and all the little UI elements you see on screen, that these things would just, scale and they would be beautiful and clean like vector graphics.
And it's gotten better. I mean, of course, it's gotten a lot better.
But it's still not resolution independent.
No, it's not.
I see this as I would boil it down to, Apple calls it Retina. They have a nice word for it. We used to call it high DPI. They call it high PPI, like, pixels per inch or whatever.
Well, it's 266, right? DPI.
So to qualify, the iPad 3, I think it's 266 or 264. So I don't remember the exact number. But to qualify for high DPI, you have to have 200 dots per inch. That's the pixel density. The iPhone is 326, somewhere in there. I don't remember the exact number there either. But it's even higher because the screen is so small. The effect is amazing. Microsoft used to do these demos for Longhorn where they would stretch out applications and they would look beautiful at any size. You could kind of do it arbitrarily. It was a great idea. They never did it. So
no,
it's nice that there was a theory.
Longhorn. There were a lot of theories for Longhorn.
Yeah.
So I'm still looking forward for that new file management system that they were coming up with
in
2003. That was the future. I remember when I read about that. I think it was a CNET article. They go, "This is it. It's so much better." And WinFS, right?
Yeah, WinFS.
WinFS, and never came. But it seems like that's the next logical step. But what's fascinating about this is we are not discussing the CPU speed anymore.
No,
we are discussing high density, screens on the laptop as a game changer. We're not talking about a quad core processor that could, push out 4 gigahertz per quad per core. That's not the thing that we are talking about anymore. We're talking about
just like we're not talking about engine displacement or rotary engines versus whatever, or Hemis and whatever.
I don't know about you, but I'm still talking about rotaries. Okay. I'm still a fan of the rotary engine. I think Mazda's should just convert everything over to
and you understand soon, if not already, there will no longer be a rotary engine in the market. That there's actually going to be a period of time where they just are not there.
Yeah, because nobody repairs them.
Well, no, because they stopped making. In other words, they actually do feel like there's some value to this kind of. Why are we talking about this? Anyway,
I don't know. I have no idea.
Off topic, but
car talk with Paul Thurrott.
Yes, so I like cars too, but the point is that is the type of stuff you talk about when it's an enthusiast market, right?
Yeah.
There will always be people who care about that, just like there'll always be people who gather on Saturday nights with their 67 Mustangs and whatever. I mean, there'll always be that audience. But
no, that'll always be there. But my biggest question to this is, will the rest, if Apple does this, and it seems like they are headed to this, and the next logical step is the laptop, and after the laptop, it's the iMac, and after the iMac, it's probably that Apple TV if it ever comes out.
Yep.
And I was saying that would make me want to buy this display if Apple put out a 42-inch high density display, with a Retina display. That then you could
especially if they own that market. Can you imagine if no one else could do it?
No one else could do it, and currently nobody else is currently doing it with their tablets.
Yeah, so whatever this future HD plus resolution is, whatever it is, 4 times 1920 by 1080, whatever that is.
But even though, and one of the arguments is, well, it's still going to be 1080, right? Because that's what it's being sent out to you. But there's more pixels.
Not if it's coming over the internet. I mean, Apple has the capability right now. They just switched over to 1080p. They flipped the switch, and a lot of that stuff is 1080p. There's no reason they couldn't. Remember how they did HD in the beginning, right? It was some stuff. I think it was rental only at first or something. Like you couldn't
through
buy an
iTunes.
HD.
Yeah, it was rental. It was rented streaming
right, so
720.
Yeah, they'll do the same thing. It'll be that. You'll have to have an Apple TV, and you can only rent the movie. But when you rent it on that Apple TV, it'll be 3,800 and whatever by whatever, whatever those numbers are.
I mean that would be that would be. I guess
you will never want to leave the house again.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I can see people paying $2,500 to $3,000 for a display like that.
Yes, because actually, and that makes a lot of sense because there is a healthy market of home theater enthusiasts. They're the type of guys who today buy Blu-ray equipment and projectors and everything. They would want to be in on this, absolutely, and that's a great way to do it because these things, by definition, are going to have to be very expensive in the beginning. You have a built-in audience.
But Paul, and this is part of the criticism that I don't get. People are saying, well, if Apple's putting out a TV, it's going to be way expensive. You're talking about a $3,000 TV, and we don't even know if this product is ever going to come out, right? We are just speculating.
We are literally inventing this
because of a
yes.
book that alluded to something like this.
Right, where he could have literally been talking about the Apple TV that just shipped.
So let's say they do this.
Yeah.
But people are forgetting what a plasma TV was like in 2012, in 2002. I bought a Hitachi 720p plasma. I'm sorry, 1080p. 1080p plasma. I paid $7,000.
Right.
For this plasma display. I still use the TV, and there goes my camera. There, a little bit more. There you go. No, the other way. There you go. No, the other way. No,
not that way. The other way.
Get rid of the white. There you go. Thank you, sir. People are knocking over cameras, but people are forgetting that everybody was paying that price if you wanted a plasma.
No, they'll do it again.
And they'll do it again. This is going to start the next
audiophiles
revolution.
who bought CDs in 1985 or whatever year that was. The first people were on board with DVD movies, thinking that was the greatest thing they've ever seen. Blu-ray, same thing. Yep, absolutely. And that's good because this stuff has to be expensive when it first comes out. It has to be. And eventually it will come down just like everything else does,
And it has to come out so it changes the game. I mean, we've had... First of all, I mean, there's a lot to criticize about television and the way the cable industry is handling HD. I think the deployment of high-definition channels has been so poor.
Sure.
I mean, they're all guilty of this. They have dropped the ball with deployment of high-def channels. There are channels that should be in high-def, and they are still not. And instead of concentrating on getting these deals and doing it, they're signing a 3D Yes Network or 3D MSG Sports channel with Verizon. Verizon now has a 3D channel that nobody can watch. Maybe 50 people will watch this channel in the New York market.
Could not care less about 3D. Could not care less. But I can tell you that an extremely high density display, bigger the better, some kind of immersive,
Yeah, no, I would love it. Absolutely. I think it'll be great.
We used to go to a theater in Phoenix called Cine Capri that doesn't exist anymore. There's a theater in Seattle that's a lot like this. I think Paul Allen had renovated it. But the point of it is it's one screen in the theater. That's all you get. And it's the size of like the Titanic. And so, when movies like Braveheart came out in the theater, we would go and we would watch these movies there. And if you sat in the front row, it was like watching a tennis match. You'd have to, swivel your head to see what happened because it was so big. And, getting an experience that can not really replicate that, but do as good as you can do at home would just be, this is every videophile's dream come true.
Oh, no, 100%. And I encourage it. I encourage the change. And I hope that Apple puts a Retina display because that'll force, companies like HP and Dell and Lenovo to start doing that.
Apple is so powerful. And I think this is a really feasible scenario since we're just making stuff up, where they could come out with this high density display for HD TVs, or whatever you want to call it, and they would control it, that they would either own every single display that was made like that, or they would just raise the price so that it would be prohibitive for anyone else to even try to compete. Not to mention the fact that they're going to have the services thing on the back end where they could have exclusives on iTunes, where people will release movies and TV shows and so forth. That only on iTunes, not on cable, not on Fios, not on anything else, that you can see them in that resolution, in just absolute stunning clarity. It could be a huge selling point.
No, very huge selling point. But it is that time to wrap it up, Paul. We need to wrap it up today. We almost must when it gets good. Go to our website, guysfromqueens.com. Also go to stream us at gfqlive.tv. You can watch us in 480p. We are just catching up. We broadcast at 864 by 480, so we are.
And we always
480p.
will. God damn it.
We're gonna stick to the 480p. Actually, Paul's in high def. He sends his 720p over the Skypes, and I downscale him to 480p.
I should have 2 cameras, and I could be in 3D.
You could be in 3D. We should do that one day. We should do a 3D broadcast. We'll just put on the glasses, and everybody will just look at us. It'll be a reverse way of doing things.
Right.
You can check out Paul's site, winsupersite.com. Also check out Paul every Thursday on the Tour Network at 2 p.m. for Windows Weekly with Mary Jo Foley. Great show, by the way.
Thank you.
One of my favorites in the world. The only thing
me
I
too.
watch. I will stand by this. That is the only thing that I ever watch or listen to. I just shut my ears and close my eyes throughout the entire day, and I wait for Thursdays.
Wow. That's
But no one's ever said that to you. And then now I will get an email calling me a liar and saying I have never seen the show.
I saw you with your eyes open on a Wednesday, so you're a liar.
Oh,
you are
Paul.
a liar.
Paul, only if I could tell you half the stuff that I got. I've gotten such vulgar messages. You would lose your mind. And that wraps it up for today. Stay tuned. Watch. What am I saying? There's no show after this. There's no show. I thought this was
Stay
Friday
tuned
for
for
some
the
reason. Stay tuned for the
vacuum
replay of
sounds.
this.
The
Yeah.
cricket chirping.
Yeah, I'll put a replay of this. But actually, if you missed any portion of this, we're going to be replaying it. So stay tuned. You can check out the replay, and we'll see you all next week on What the Tech. Good night, everybody.